can you explain what the 15-minute-a-day method is?
If you study systematically, okay, if you do the same, if you get into a habit, if you do the same thing at the same time in the same place every day, it becomes a habit, and then it becomes hard not to do it. It's amazing how much you can achieve. It's astounding. 15 minutes, best methods I have found. And so they work by bilingual text columns. You have this recording only in the target language.
Alexander, welcome. We've had by far the greatest pre-show discussion I think any person has ever had, because we got to speak, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 languages before we got going. And so you're a man that needs no introduction, but please, first off, how you doing? And then second, let us know who you are. It's hard to give the people a good description.
Okay, well, thank you so much. I'm doing pretty well. I'm looking out my window right here and seeing we're actually getting a blizzard for the first time in a year, and that's challenging. But if it's supposed to be that way, that's the way it's supposed to be, and it looks pretty nice. So, in between talking to you, I'm going to be shoveling snow some today because I'm in northern Minnesota now. But I'm a guy who's lived my life all over the world for the sake of learning languages and cultures about it. I just had that bee in my bonnet since I was very young. I was very fortunate to have a very good education, get to study what I wanted, get a good sound basis in studying languages, and have always seen studying languages as much more than just languages, but really opening doors to, on so many different levels, on so many different not just intellectual but spiritual levels, and just in terms of really expanding your mind, and and sort of getting a deeper understanding of what language is. All languages, I think, are reflections of language, and that's the way our minds work. So coming to understand that, I've always been an explorer of that, and so I've had a career of teaching as a university professor in many countries, learning languages in those countries, teaching other languages while I was there, and also been involved in a number of institutes that offer intensive, immersive training for adults in foreign languages. And so I've always been interested in that kind of thing as well, and had been talking about sort of opening my own kind of academy for teaching and learning languages with kind of my approach, because I've always felt very constrained and put to fit in a narrow tight jacket in traditional roles. And I've been thinking about this for a long time, but always imagined it had to be brick and mortar, and didn't conceive of doing it virtually. But then with a couple of experiences, in COVID times, learning how to do things virtually, I realized it could work. And so for the past couple of years, I've been interacting with individuals, just giving them the benefit of my entire range of learning that they're interested in learning in small group format, to sort of have continuing lifelong education in sort of languages and literatures, and just thinking and talking about important things, deep things. So I'm very blessed to have gotten that going, and now I'm blessed now when people like you reach out to me. And, as I said before, there's so many interesting people that I've met through doing this, and you're another one, and there's so many people in the world that we can't possibly know what all the things are going on, but to make connections like this feels very special. So again, thank you for reaching out to me.
Absolutely. You've been one of the most intriguing people I've come across in this journey of mine. And so what I want to do, and what I always try to do on our podcast, is just kind of seep all of that knowledge that you have gained and garnered from all these years. And so you discussed where you're going with with your academy and all the stuff you're hoping to do. I came across one of your videos where you were discussing something, and you took the words out of my mouth. And this video was the nature method. Mm-hmm. And you were discussing how it was come around, I believe the 1890s to 1930s or 20s, something mm-hmm. around like this. Could you explain to people what the nature method is, why it was important, or why you believe it to be useful, and maybe what people can gain from checking that out? And then we'll eventually get, obviously, to the more encompassing of your methods. as well.
Sure, sure. Yeah, the nature method was, yes, it grew up sort of before World War One, around World War One, and after that, it stayed around in a place called the Nature Institute that published a lot of books using this method. It is sort of pretty available now. But the whole idea behind it, the nature is that if there's a way to teach a language through the language itself without reference to a teaching language, that was what was really people were trying to do with that. And so a lot of these nature method books will start with relatively simple vocabulary that should be transparent if these words are the words that you have in your own language. And there are pictures and little things to get you started. So you can start reading and understanding simple phrases from the beginning and then build upon that. So the ideal would be that you would not need to have reference to a teaching language, and you would start to think in this language immediately. And this grew up, I think, a lot of people were trying to learn Latin still at that time and realizing that teaching it as a dead language was not very effective, whereas if they could get people thinking in it and using it, then it could be spoken like any other language. And that's another very strong passion of mine now, is spoken conversational Latin, using precisely this kind of idea behind it. Yeah, there are a number of books that start this way, and the learning curve is usually nice and gentle. It is, it's simple things at the beginning, but you do build upon it. And so there are a number of books that are out there called Latin. We were just talking about Latin. Lingua Latina per se illustrata is a famous book that uses this method. So you start out, and I forget what the first sentence is, but it's something like, Italia est in Europa. I mean, how can you not understand that, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So Italia est in Europa, and Nilus est fluvium. Okay, the Nile is what?
River.
You just
Yeah, yeah,
right.
yeah.
So you start building on things like that, and that's the idea. So yeah.
Yeah, fascinating. It's a really cool way to learn, and it is unfortunate. There is quite a bit of material out there now. I see a lot of revolutions. I mean, let's say quite a bit, but there are some people that are wanting to revive that as a method. I'm going to ask you a loaded question, just because I think it'll get directly to it. It'll get directly to the point. What's wrong with language learning, the traditional method in schools today? Why is there a need for you to go create an academy if we have so many people taking Spanish and Italian and German and Russian all over the world? Why is it not working?
I think, I love the idea of people learning languages, because learning languages is so rewarding, and it's something when you find something rewarding, you don't want to selfishly keep it to yourself and not let others know about it. I mean, it opens up so much understanding and so many doors. So I would love the idea of sharing it with more people, but I think the truth of the matter is that you can't really make people learn languages if they don't want to. And so having all sorts of that's the fundamental program, is that that they don't want to learn it. They're not there to learn it. They're told they have to. They're put in a place. It's and so there's just. Then they're in it and they treat it like any other subject, and it's not like any other subject. And some good students can do well in it like they do in any other subject. And then these are the people, and who turn around and say, I took that language for 5 years and I got A's in it, but I never learned it. So there's if the people aren't interested in it and don't want to do it. But I think that it's because one thing is that they're just approaching, apart from the fact that they don't want to do it, they're just approaching it on one level, on that purely linguistic grammatic. It's grammar and vocabulary and pronunciation, all these things, that we put all these together and you get it, and then you have the language. But there's not really much focus on like what the language is used to express, the culture behind it, the idea that by learning a foreign language, you're changing your own mind. By learning a foreign language, you're challenging your perceptions. You're challenging everything about the way you see the world. So not getting people to see it on another level, not getting people to have a sort of a feeling that, I should know a foreign language. If I don't know a foreign language, I'm kind of poor. Anybody can know a foreign language. He knows foreign language. This guy go over 5 languages. How come I don't know any languages? I mean, if you got people to feel that way, if you got people to feel like I'm I should know a foreign language, and it's and it's good for me to see things, and then I'll be able to read these books in there and go to this country. Then I think you'd have a different reason. But if you just get people sitting in school because they have to be there because they don't really want to learn it, but they're told it's a requirement.
Right.
Yeah.
You get this. Yeah. 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 I couldn't agree more. They're dealing with a couple issues. One, some people don't want to be there. Two, you don't want to be there, and then they don't tailor it towards you. They don't teach you some of the tricks and some of the things that we do know about language learning, at least to kind of make it easier on you. It gets treated like any other subject, like math or something else, where you just check the boxes and move on, get your A's, and you're unfortunate. And so, this leads me to my next question, which is somewhat. Let me just put it this way: you've been blessed and able to learn languages for such a long time, and develop your own methods and travel around the world. And you've done immersion, where you've been in the place, and you've also studied languages that are dead languages, and you've done such a tremendous job at exposing yourself and not worrying about limits and barriers, which is a big thing for some people who. And I learned Italian without going to Italy. That was a big thing for me because I had teachers and professors saying that just wasn't a thing. You're just not gonna. It's not how it works. We now have AI. We now have things like Duolingo and other apps that have gamified language learning. What are your thoughts on this? Like, as this is now starting to develop and become a bigger thing. I don't think I've heard you speak on that. What are your thoughts?
I'm old fashioned. I'm old fashioned. I don't want to bite the hand that feeds me. My academy is virtual. I'm able to reach people by making videos and posting them on YouTube. You and I are talking through the internet right now. There's so many. If you want to see some of these nature method courses from the 1914s, they're on the Internet Archive. You can get all this wonderful material from there. So I don't want to bite the hand that feeds me, but I also believe, and we need more digital detox in our day and age. And when you are trying to learn or study or focus on something, I just find it, I'm just of that generation. I did not grow up, but I'm not a digital native, and I just feel, I feel better focused when I am not studying on my phone or on the computer. I feel better focused when I'm doing something with my mind, with a pen and paper, with a book, with listening to some sort of recording. That's I feel somehow better focused.
Mhm.
So
Yeah. Yeah, I tend to believe that's the case myself. I've seen that myself. I obviously didn't grow up necessarily with everything from the internet, and I see now this idea that maybe some children or young people will never necessarily engage in just a book reading
mhm.
conversation. They would just be all on whatever it is, whatever app, trying to learn the language, and I would say having less success
Yep.
than someone like you or
Yeah.
I.
So on the one hand, yes, I do see that they are, yeah, to me, yeah, just to get off of the app is valuable. And I'm also in that my old-fashioned prejudice. I just think that those nature method and older methods in general, I just think have more substance. I haven't looked at every app. I haven't kept up with
Sure,
everything.
sure.
I'm not using them. I can't judge everything. I know that people are working hard at making good things. I'm sure there's some really good ones out there, but just in general, what I've seen is that language instructional material just across the board is getting weaker.
Yeah.
More, it was, just if you just told me, I can't know anything else, but here's a book that was published like 1960, and here's a book published last year, to give you like a real good introduction, firm foundation in the language. Which one would I choose? The older one.
Yeah. 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 I've seen that to be the case as well. Um, so with that being said, I saw some of your work in which you would study 15 minutes a day at a certain time. I mean, you haven't necessarily mentioned it, and I'll let you go ahead. But you had a period of your life which was quite intense with language learning. Not that it's not right now, but more intense than most people can probably imagine. So, can you explain what you were doing, and then can you explain what the 15-minute a day method is?
Okay. Um, I was giving way to a channeled frustration of not being able to follow, of being, uh, to me, I'm glad I earned my doctorate. It was an important experience to me to go through being guided through conceptualizing a long-term research project, carrying it out, writing it up, analyzing it. That's a very valuable process to me, and having a PhD after my name has enabled my career. I'm glad that I did it, but it was a very tightened, narrow process. I was told, openly, you don't use the word polyglot. People will look down on you for that. It's not serious. You need to focus on one thing. You need to narrow down. This is not time for learning wider. This is time for becoming an expert. This is time for becoming a specialist. I was told these things openly, and among my friends and colleagues, there was hardly anybody that had any sort of, like, the things we were studying required studying languages, but so they did it, but they saw it as drudge work. They didn't love it. They weren't excited about it. They didn't want to do more. They wanted to do as little as possible, and and get on with some sort of theory or something else. So I it was worthwhile to me to get through my doctorate, but that meant I couldn't do any language work or anything like that. I just had to say, I'm going to do it later. I'm going to do it later. I'm going to do it later. And then I got a postdoctoral fellowship in Europe. So I got to do it there, and boom, all my European languages went wonderful. And that's when I got interested in Korean as a real challenge. And when I got to Korea, I found myself in a unique circumstance where I was able to really devote almost all of my time to studying a really wide, broad spectrum of languages. And I had collected over the years just materials for teaching yourself the widest range of everything I could find. And so I just wanted to explore it. I wanted to learn a language of every type, and and I was able to structure this. But I just found that being systematic and structured and regular was the real key. That it would never work if you said, I'm just going to plunge into this language and do nothing else for 2 weeks, and then you do this, and then and if you just randomly go about it. But if you study systematically, okay, if you do the same, if you get into a habit, if you do the same thing at the same time in the same place every day, it becomes a habit, and then it becomes hard not to do it. And so if you can get into a habit like that, it's amazing how much you can achieve. It's astounding. I look, one thing I did in that time was I took these are like from textbooks for a Persian reader. And so I took larger photocopies of them, and I looked up all the words, and I wrote the words I didn't know underneath. And so I made an interlinear text for myself to review. And I've got stacks of these things, and I just can't figure out, how is it possible? I mean, it's amazing the amount that you can actually get done.
Totally.
So 15 minutes was basically what I found one of the main best methods I have found for teaching myself languages. Is published by a French company called Assimil. I don't know if you know them. Assimil. Yes. If you don't, you should. Yes, Assimil. And so they work by bilingual text columns. You have this recording only in the target language, bilingual text columns, little footnotes. The nature of these, each course is different, but by nature that they're very short lessons. So you can kind of do and review one of these lessons, and also review a past couple of lessons, and learn a new lesson at a relatively good rate. And so 15 minutes a day is about what it would take to make, slow but steady progress through a method like this and get it to a year. The people who publish it say you should spend half an hour a day. You could spend an hour in a day and get through it more. But the idea is, when you assimilate this book, when you assimilate this material, you'll have a good chunk of the language inside of you. And so I think things like that actually work better at a slower pace. I think languages are living things, just like those plants behind you. They get planted and they need to grow, and that's not something you can always force. It just takes a bit of time. So 15 minutes a day, I think, is a good slow rate to get things going regularly. It's a good slow rate to get into a habit if you don't have a habit of doing something like that. And it's enough to make progress if you're obsessed with languages and you're trying to learn lots of languages at the same time. That's generally enough to work with one language, and that way be able to do lots of languages at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really cool. What you said about discipline and being shocked at what you can do, I've seen that in myself. I don't know that I've ever mentioned my the catalyst for this journey that I'm on right now was the book, The Count of Monte Cristo, which I know you love to read like me. I don't know if you've ever read the book,
Mhm.
but if you remember when Edmond Dantes was stuck in jail, he had this old priest who had taught him everything. He just taught him languages, science, math, other important things and skills. And I was just obsessed with this guy to get this opportunity to cram all this knowledge and then to go out in the world and to do it. And it was at that age, and I was 16. I believe I was 16. I think I was a sophomore in high school when I read that. I read the abridged version, not knowing that an unabridged version existed. I didn't even know what that was at the time, I don't think. So when I discovered it, I was so happy, that there was this huge book, now over 1,000 pages. And that set me off on this journey where I said at 16, I said 10 languages. Like if I could learn 10 languages in my life, knowing pretty much 2 at that time, that's good. I'm good to go. Fast forward, let's just go 16 years later after that, and I had gotten to 7, 8, and I was like, well, I undershot this. I undershot what I potentially feel is possible. And so my question is one of, now that we live in an age where everything is, we want things now. And if you type in how to learn a language into Google or YouTube, the next thing that you're going to get is not how to learn a language slowly, consistently with discipline. You're going to get, how do I learn this as fast as possible? Give it to me now.
I needed this yesterday.
Yeah, exactly. It's not going to be anything like what you just said. And so could you touch on, there's a really interesting book called Deep Work, and I'm not sure if you're aware of that, but there's a scientist or professor, I'm not sure if he's a scientist or a professor, I'm not sure, Cal Newport, essentially that society will split into 2 pieces, which may already have happened, the people who can focus and the people who can't. The people who can focus deeply and learn complex subjects at a relatively fast pace will start to separate themselves, and the people who can't will slowly become whatever it is that they're doing, fractured into not being able to pay attention. Did you or do you, how do you structure that time? That's my second question, is a follow-up to that. No phone, no computer. How does that look? You're looking and reading and writing and listening, or how are you ensuring that your mind is optimal for the time that you've selected to learn a language?
So one thing I do is, it's just one of the most simple things in the world. Anybody could do it. I just, I do not leave myself connected to the internet all the time. When I don't want to be on the internet, I just turn off the internet connection, and then I can sit on my computer and I can type on it like I could type on a typewriter or a word processor, or I don't have my mic in front of me now, but I've got a mic that I do recordings and read books for. I've got it in another room. So I've got a separate place where I go, and when I want to sit and write, I go and I sit and I write in the basement. When I go and record audiobooks, I go in the next room where I have my audio set up and I sit there. So I like to work with spaces as well. But yeah, no, I've never carried my phone with me on a regular basis. You can see all my books behind me. I like to just sort of grab those. But yes, I am cognizant of the passage of time. When you work with something like 15 minutes of time, I'm not perfect, but I've got a pretty good feel for what 15 minutes is. I've got a good feel for what half an hour is, good feel for what an hour is, and I've got a pretty good feel for what I can do in that, how long I can stay focused on one thing. One thing I discovered a long time ago is that if I try to stay focused on one thing for too long, at a certain point, you spend energy trying to stay focused rather than focusing on the other thing. Whereas if I switch topics, like not necessarily every 15 minutes, but it's another thing. It's a good chunk of time for languages. You can do everything. If I switch topics, and I may go back and forth, then that keeps me fresher. So you need to stay focused on one thing long enough to achieve something with it or do something with it, but you don't want to stay focused on it when you're focusing your energy on focusing it. So if you've got a number of related tasks, then you can go and with something like learning a language, it's actually even better, because if you're going to spend an hour a day working on a language, if you do it all in one chunk, then you've got to go 23 hours before you get back to it. But if you do it 15 minutes here, 15 minutes there, 15 minutes there, 15 minutes, you're coming back to it every 4 or 5 hours. And so you're keeping it alive in your brain. And so you're keeping yourself more focused and active on it. So,
and on the same vein, I know that you have also, and I don't think we've touched on this, but some background. Was it as a monk or in the religious? Sorry, maybe not a monk, but within the religious world. Where I'm going with this is, have you used meditation to enhance your language
yes.
learning capabilities? Let's say, could you touch on that and those things?
Yeah. I mean, that's to me. What I call the spiritual side of language learning. And again, if for you and for me, like, we can speak German, and a German person can speak German. But you and I have put German in our brains by our own conscious decision. We made a choice to do that. We can make that our operating system because we wanted to control that and not just let our minds do that. So German in his mind, in his brain, his mouth is not quite the same as it is in ours. It's English in our brain is what German is to his. So when you learn a foreign language, it really does open, I think, doors to understanding more deeply. So I think that there is, if you approach it within that light, in that spirit, there is an inherently mind-opening experience about seeing things differently, seeing things really differently, conceptualizing them differently. And so if you approach it that way, that's one way. Another way is, as you mentioned, I've always been very interested in older languages and comparative history of religions. And so a lot of the languages that I had studied are what I would call inherently spiritual languages. Sanskrit, or Latin. Latin has been used for so many things, but it's the official language of the Catholic Church. It's been in use for 2,000 years as the carrier of a spiritual tradition. And so, as I said, I'm working more and more with Latin myself these days. And so there's some really deep thinkers in the Catholic tradition. Thomas Aquinas, he wrote this Summa Theologica and the huge encyclopedic works about everything, really complicated essays on truth, on things. And it breaks your head to try to figure out. You have to read it, you have to think about it. It's really complicated. Well, he wrote some hymns also that are really beautiful, that rhyme. And if you can, what I've done is I've learned these hymns by heart, recite them as part of my Latin practice, but it's also part of my prayer practice, my meditation practice, my spiritual practice. And when you know something that's deep and you know it by heart and you can recite it with different moods and different feelings, it's not the same thing each time. It's different every time you do it. So this is a way using languages to get like at a deeper, meditative prayer life is something that I have been striving actively to do.
Yeah. That's a very good point with the emotional side of things. I found from some of the people who have a desire to learn languages, they lack the feeling that, and I heard you once mention, I think the question was posed to you, do you feel like you're a different person in each of your languages? And you said, not necessarily, but then I think you told an anecdote about how, I believe it was in Sweden, where you didn't have a whole lot of time to learn the language, but then you were like, well, I have to speak to someone. So you became outgoing, right. And you kind of feel that you continually have that, right? Mm-hmm. And so that's a level of emotion. There's something tacked on. There's something that we don't yet quite understand about the imprint that language has on us in our way to express and relate to our world, that is very hard for me to convey to people who don't speak several languages, or at least a few, right?
I could totally concur that, yes, to finding other people who, again, I'm blessed that my father is a polyglot. For me, it was normal. Okay. I grew up in a home seeing, all these books and stuff like this. So, but it's been pretty lonely out there in the world. Like I said, I'm sort of discouraged from doing it as a professional academic, and then having serious conversations with other polyglots, even if you can find them. That's kind of a hard thing to do too. But no, I have had enough experience with that yeah, when you meet other people who've really learned a good handful of languages, yes, you can have conversations with them that it's hard to have with people who haven't done it.
Right. You also have, I don't know if this is true, but you have one of the world's largest language libraries, correct?
I believe so.
Per
In terms of the number of languages that
languages.
I have materials for learning, I spent
Yes.
a very happy 2 years in Berlin at the Humboldt Universität, where they had what was called the Mediathek, and it was, I forget, they had something like, I think, 75 languages, materials for 70. It was a full scale library. I mean, it had lots of books for everything and lots of, I don't have, it's in my home. It's not small,
Sure, sure,
but
sure.
I've gone out of my way to collect materials for something. So I do think that I've got materials. If you came to me and said, "Hey, I want to study this. Do you have anything for it?" I think I probably would, if it's something you
Yeah.
could name that there's something to study.
Right, right. Yeah, I think as far as personal collections go, I think it's got to be true. I mean, yeah, you're not fighting against maybe the Vatican or something like that. Okay, but yeah, in a personal library, I would say, yeah, if up to 155 or more, that's massive. Um, my next question is one of there's going to be a lot of people that watch this that are going to be fascinated by what you've done, that are going to want to then start immediately tomorrow on or today or right after they see this video. How would you best give someone an idea of how to get started learning just their next language if they're monolingual, or even if they're bilingual and they've never tried to learn another language?
Mm-hmm.
What would you tell them to do from day one?
I would say you mentioned, was it Cal Newport's
Mhm.
book?
Deep work. Yes.
I think there's another book similar along the lines. It was James Clear's Atomic Habits. Um,
Yes.
you must start. You must build a habit. Okay, that's what I'd say from day one. The most important thing is to build a habit. To get, you're going to have to put yourself into a position where you can, hear this language being used and spoken. But if you also want to learn it systematically or teach it to yourself before you get into contact with it, learning a language requires systematic, dedicated thing. As we just joked a moment ago, you're not going to find that if you do an internet search. Learn a language slowly and systematically. You're going to learn a language fast, but sorry, slow and steady, slow and systematic is what it takes. So. I think many people who are excited and inspired to pursue the path of the polyglot, let's call it that, are, build big plans, and say, okay, if I saw him do it, so I'm sure I could do something similar. I could get started, and ultimately you can, but not at first. You need to work up to it. So I would say, make sure that you're building a slow, systematic habit and build up from that. I think that's really important.
Mhm. Uh, you have a method of shadowing, and could you explain what that is? Kind of, that's something that I'd never run across. What is it exactly?
Shadowing is, I want you to imagine you're in a shopping mall, and it's like a Friday night, and there's some teenage girl ahead of you, and she's got her headphones in, and she's listening to something, and she's singing along as she's going. Okay, she's listening and she's singing at exactly the same time. She is shadowing that song. Shadowing is when you listen to something, when you listen to a voice, and you speak right on top of it. There's always going to be like a split, teeny tiny second of a hang. But if you get into practice of shadowing, and if you shadow a recording repeatedly, you can get really good at this. And when you speak right on top of it, you match your voice to the voice that you're hearing. So it's a very good technique for learning to speak with natural flow and developing all sorts of things. But that's the essence of it, is that it's listening and not speaking after the sound, but speaking on top of the sound. And that's something that you can learn. I give the analogy of, you ever play handball in a court, like racquetball, but just with gloves on your hands? So it's like you're in a handball court. If you never played handball before, if you and I went at a handball court first time, I would slaughter you because you would have no idea how the ball was going to bounce. But you're an athlete, you would catch it, you would see it, and probably within 5 games, you'd be slaughtering me because you've got that, athletic skill built up for there. But at first, you don't know how the ball's going to hit off the ankle. Right. So that's the same thing with shadowing. You build up a reflex to being able to speak on top of a voice. So it's a great way to, I think, to get the feel of a language. you can speak on top of a voice, and if it's a voice is saying something that you understand, you can understand the language you don't understand, which is a real trip. It's a real mind trip. But if you know what it's saying, you know what they're saying, and you're saying it along with it, even though you don't have the exact vocabulary, you have the feeling of understanding if you can get into the feeling of a language.
Mm-hmm. I've seen you discuss also as well just the importance of reading, and you have a love of literature, and it's something you're passionate about. There's an important stage for all language learners. I think if they want to get there's the fun and the excitement of the beginning phase where just learning anything and you're soaking things up fast. And once you've kind of cemented it, all language learners know there's this plateau phase where you have to eventually put some extra effort in
time. Yep.
Right. If you want to go from here to here, there's it's usually a conscious decision that I want to be better in this language. And I saw you discuss reading out loud as an important portion of that. Why is that so important?
That's a realization that I'm coming to more and more. And one that if we'd had this conversation 20 years ago, I don't know that I would have necessarily stressed that. I would have in that method that I talk about using the thing. There's a time when you read aloud and do something like that. But subsequently, I have just gotten more and more experience with first and foremost had my own sons, the experience of reading stories aloud to your sons and seeing how that, really transforms things. Okay. So the important experience of doing that, maybe that got me doing it a bit more too. But I also think that with my shadowing method, it involves listening through earphones, and when you do this for years, for hours a day, you start to worry you're going to damage your hearing or something. So I think I've just been looking for things, more digital detax, things that I could do myself. And being a classroom professor, I've learned how to project and get my voice and across. And I just know that when I'm speaking loudly and clearly, whether I'm shadowing, whether I'm lecturing, whether I'm talking, you get much more, you concentrate better, and you get more, it's just a much more effective way of speaking, even to yourself, than is like just muttering silently. Even when you think about it, when you think of muttering silently, you're thinking quietly, you can just feel your posture start to relax and you start to get slumped over. But when you're like reading aloud, trying to make something come alive and do that. And then as we were just talking about literature, I've realized that so much of the older literature that I love, and the literature that I think maybe might still be out there in the oral traditions of the world that hasn't been recorded, was originally oral, long epic poems, people had these long things memorized, so that was inherently oral. For most of history, reading was done aloud. There's a very telling incident in St. Augustine's Confessions when he talks about seeing his teacher, Ambrose, reading silently, because nobody read silently. Nobody understood what this guy was doing. Why isn't he moving his lips? So it really, I just think most literature, most stuff over time has been said aloud. I do know a lot of languages, but I don't get a lot of chance to speak them. Reading them aloud is a chance for me to speak and, speak them aloud myself. So it just sort of all fell into place. But then also talking about shadowing, I don't just do that with materials for learning. Nowadays, I do that more with the languages that I do know well, with audiobooks, and really choosing a good narrator who brings the language to life. That makes such a huge difference. So I've just really realized more and more that inherent oral component of languages is really important.
That reminds me of one of the big debates online, I guess, within the language learning community, which is speak from day one or input. And there are a lot of people that are very much on both sides of the camp. One which says, take as much input as you possibly need. Don't speak. They'll tell you not to speak. And then there are others, right, that will say, from day one, go and speak. Do you have any sense of what feels best to you, or do you leave that up to, say, someone to determine on their own?
Yeah, I do think that there are different strokes for different folks when it comes to language learning. Absolutely. And there
Mm.
might be people for whom it is very good to do that sort of silent immersion and do that. I think I heard of a program in Thailand for some reason, particularly famous for, really almost like taping your mouth shut. So you can't say anything, but you're expected not to say anything. Listen and absorb for, a number of weeks, and then you're allowed to speak.
Mm.
That sounds horrific to me personally. I mean, again, the nature of shadowing is imitating, like a little kid, a 2-year-old kid starts imitating people that he hears. So to me, it's just my gut impulse. If you put me, have a foreign language spoken behind me, my ear's just going to go. You know what that is? I want to know what that is. And then if you give me the opportunity or any kind of thing, then my next impulse is I'm going to try to start shadowing that. I'm going to try to start imitating that. I'm going to try to start making that sound. If it's appropriate, if I could possibly do that. So if I'm on the train, I'm not going to turn around and start doing that. But if it's something that I hear, I've got a recording of it, I find a video of it, I could listen. I'm doing it on the front of the computer. I could start doing that right away.
Right. Yeah. I have a tendency to believe that, just like you, everybody's different, and that's part of, for me personally, what I find so wrong within the traditional method. And I understand this is not, I guess you could say no one's at fault, but truly as a society, I think we need to understand that if you have 30 people in the class and we've decided this is the way to learn a language, someone's getting dropped off the boat here.
Mm-hmm.
Someone's getting left behind. But yeah, I tend to believe that the beauty of it, and I don't know what you believe, whether or not it's easier as a kid to learn a language. I understand we have so much baggage as adults packed on in our belief systems and things, and I understand that kids don't have that. But one of the beauty about being able to speak, like you said, you hear this and kids will imitate this. Well, one of the beauties of being an adult is you already know things and you can ask things, and if you can get a few question words, you can start digging into the world quickly if you have a curiosity about it. And being curious is a very important component into actually learning a language. And so I find that there has to be some sort of balance between the two. I'm also, at some point, I'm going to learn some ancient languages. Right now, I have a very big curiosity with Latin, and I think I mentioned that. But I know it would be really cool to do ancient Greek, or even some. I have a friend who's learning Sumerian. I have no idea how he's going about that at all, but he's an archaeologist. What would be your advice for people that want? And I know, for instance, ancient Greek, I think during the Renaissance period was like in vogue. Like that was like the cool thing to do, was to learn ancient Greek and talk about the philosophers and all that. How do you go about that? I know you have a nice library, but how would someone go about doing that?
I'm sorry, what? Learning
an ancient language. I know you've spoken a little bit about Latin, but because you may not be able to read the script. I mean, what about hieroglyphs and
right.
What do you do?
Okay, so yeah, no, I've always been fascinated by ancient languages. Again, I studied Latin and ancient Greek and Sanskrit in college, and then some others. I've got materials for ancient Egyptian. I don't know if I have anything for Sumerian. I think I have something for Sumerian in my library. I've got Akkadian, these older Mesopotamian languages. Something, yes, as you mentioned, there was sort of a vogue for speaking Greek in the Renaissance, because people were already speaking Latin. So for a long time, people spoke Latin and tried to speak Greek, but somehow in recent centuries, people have stopped teaching these languages as spoken languages, and a very, very different pedagogy has emerged, where you're really just taught to read and translate sentence by sentence, word by word, parse it, explain everything. It's just over analysis. Because of the complex structure of these languages, I think it is important that you know how to do it, but you don't need to do it all the time, as a way of reading it that is totally different from reading, say, French or German. So, and in my experience, it's a slower way. It's a less enjoyable way. It makes it much harder to actually read and understand and appreciate the literature. So These days, there's that approach of teaching these languages sort of as dead languages. But I think the key is, as we were talking about the nature language before, to teach them as living languages, to teach them as languages where you can already do that. So, again, I'm always in any interview, I always end up giving this Assimil firm free publicity, but they've got methods for Latin, for ancient Greek, and for ancient Egyptian. So you could use that sort of same basic methodology to learn the hieroglyphs of the Egyptian hieroglyphs. You could learn a version of ancient. And these days, also with there's there are I'm kind of obliquely related to them. I haven't had any personal contact, but I'm just aware that there are large numbers of relatively speaking, that there are organizations out there that are really promoting spoken Latin and spoken Greek and even spoken Sanskrit. And Arabic, modern standard Arabic is, that's a classical language in itself. And that's something that people could easily speak a lot more, but that could be promoted. So there's these big classical languages out there that, if you can hear them as spoken languages, if you can learn them as spoken languages, you can learn them like other things. So we were talking about that Latin method that you could use to start to get into Latin as a spoken vehicle rather than as a dead language.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned Arabic. That's a language that I'm going to learn. But even from the outside, and clearly from the outside, and I've been to Egypt 3 times, and so whenever I'm there, I pick up what I can, but I've never given it any true. Obviously, with all the others, I have this issue. From outside, it looks so confusing because on the surface, the advice I'm receiving on what to do is very confusing. People telling me to learn a dialect. And then some people saying, no, you need to learn modern standard Arabic, or just is it modern standard, or is it the classical, what's spoken on the news?
Yeah, that's modern standard Arabic.
Modern standard. Okay, yes, yeah.
MSA, modern standard Arabic.
Yes. Okay. And they say, do this. They're saying, do this, and then you can branch out. And they're saying, well, no, because no one speaks like that, so you shouldn't do that. What should I do? That's my question.
Again, this is another one where there are different strokes for different folks. What are your goals with Arabic? What do you ultimately want to do with Arabic? If you want
speak everywhere, in the Arabic world.
Yeah, if you want to speak everywhere in the Arabic world, then you need modern standard Arabic. And it really is true that is the root, the core. And the dialects have diverged from that. The dialects have come from that. And so dialects might have a substrata for other things, and you can understand how dialects diverge. But I think trying to learn, say, Moroccan, and then trying to learn Egyptian, and then trying to learn Sudanese, and then trying to learn Levantine, and then then Eastern, like Iraqi Arabic. They would be like 5 or 6 tasks if you just tried to go and speak the dialect. But I think if you had the core language first, then when you encountered these dialects, they would be a lot clearer. But that's the path that I took. That's the only thing that I can say, but again, I did it as an academic. I did it with my goal was ultimately, I want to read the Arabian Nights in the original. I want to read, Arabic literature in the original. I want to appreciate Arabic literature, Arabic civilization. So I went with that goal, and I had no problem being a university professor. I had, the professors of Arabic were overjoyed to speak with me. I never had any trouble getting people to speak with me.
Okay.
I had on occasions when I met Arabs who only spoke a local dialect, and I only spoke the standard thing, we were able to communicate. It was not, it was not like, the people always imagine it's like if you learn modern standard Arabic, you're speaking like Shakespeare and it's ridiculous and people are going to make fun of you and you can't use it. No.
That's exactly what
no.
Is that not the case?
That has not been my experience. I lived in Lebanon for 2 years and in Dubai for 6 years, and I tried to speak Arabic, standard, Arabic everywhere I could, and I picked up a comprehension of the Gulf dialect and the Levantine dialect, but I kind of felt that if I were going to live and stay there for a long time, I would want to learn the local dialect. But I did feel again, that having that core foundation would enable me then to do that much more easily if I ever wanted to. So I always decided to focus on shoring up my modern standard Arabic, because my God, that is a complex and rich language. It is so, yeah, it's really challenging. It really is demanding in terms of how much time and effort you need to give it. But I think that it's probably, a guy like you could look at it this way. If you know Arabic, then the same way when you the word important is the same in most European languages because it's a Latin root. So if you can find words with Arabic roots in a huge swathe of languages all across the globe, from African languages, I don't know how much Yoruba has of Arabic in it, but Swahili has a lot. So from African languages through Turkish and all the Turkic dialects, Persian, Dari, Urdu, Bengali, Malay, Indonesian. A huge swathe across the globe is like the same way we have words for important and literature. All the words that we have that are Latin derived, all these languages are going to have words that are Arabic derived. So I think probably Arabic could open more doors to other languages. Apart from Arabic dialects, Arabic would open up doors to Indonesia.
All those.
Yeah, to all these. So it's been very rewarding.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the other things that resonated
but
much.
One thing, but if you're a professional football player and you're going to go and be on the team with Cairo, then that you go learn the Egyptian dialect.
Yeah. Funny enough, I played a year in Morocco. I played in Fez. And while there, though, I had to make the very obvious decision to continue. My coach was French, who, I had to make the decision, obviously, to learn and continue with French because it would give me the easiest pathway in order to communicate with teammates and everyone there. And even the people who don't have a very good or high level in French, they understand French for the most part. All of my teammates understood some French. I don't think anyone didn't understand any French at all. So that was really cool. But I know Arabic will be something that I have to do. My last question is one to do with what I was going to say is essentially that what resonated so much is as a professional athlete traveling around the world, I've had to learn languages kind of in a solo manner. Only one club, funny enough, when I played in Denmark, when I got there, we had so many foreigners from outside of Europe that didn't speak, not just out from outside of Europe, the French guys didn't speak, they didn't speak English. And so the director decided, for 9 guys, I'm getting you guys all tutors. You guys all get English. And it was a Danish, an older Danish woman. And I said, Jakob, like, why? I want to learn Danish. And he looked at me with the most insane look, like, why? Literally. What's wrong with you? Why? You speak English. What are you doing? I said, I want to learn Danish. Like, I live in Denmark now. Like, why would I not want to? And so that was the only time any club has ever paid for and had a translator for the players and stuff like that. Usually they just do it they have a translator for the coach. And he's there on the field and stuff like that. And so my question becomes, a lot of the methods that you have developed allow people to not have any excuses, kind of. Also, if you can get your hands on this material, you can start learning, right?
Exactly.
And so why did that develop instead of, most people will search for courses, classes, and I know you're not obviously against those at all, but was that just a matter of necessity, or was that because you had such a drive to learn that you just weren't going to wait for the next Egyptian course to be happening?
All right. In order to explain this, goes back to another thing. I'm an example of somebody who was put in a French class when he was 11 years old with no particular explanation of why I was doing it, and and the thing. And I thought I did well. I liked the teacher, but with hindsight, I think when I moved to a different school district, the first teacher probably hadn't been very good. I didn't learn very much, but they saw I'd had 4 years of French, so they put me in the 4th year French, and I was like behind, and I struggled, and I worked hard at it and stuff, and I kind of caught up, and I liked it. I did speak French with my girlfriend in high school. It was like coming alive. And then when I got to college and I was okay, now I can do more languages. I was going to take a test. I was sure I was going to pass out of French. I passed into second year French. I passed after I started when I was 11. When I was 18, I passed into second year French. 7 years to get like 1 year of French. Well, so I went into second year French, and I also started studying German. I've been wanting to do German for a long time and didn't have German in my high school, so I started German. And I just had my German, the circumstances in my college, Columbia University in New York, the teacher that I had, this class size, everything was right. I mean, the amount of, it was well taught. It was the way it should be done. And so I learned, my French got a lot better, and I learned German. But I just saw, wow, that one effective year of German, that was really so much better than those like slow, wasted years of French. And I also thought, even though I really found that German experience good, nonetheless, I still felt like I was kind of held back by the class. I felt like I could have gone faster. I felt like, there were times in the class, it was just like, this is kind of, can't we go a little faster? A lot faster, please. And so at the same time, I decided, as I mentioned, I was going to study ancient languages, and I started studying, I think it was Latin first, and I saw, this is hard. This takes a lot of work. This, you need to slave away at this. But French, German, Spanish, these are spoken languages. These are things you can have around you. Why does this need to be so hard? So I thought to myself, I've seen that 1 year of German this way was so much better than this. I've seen that a language like Latin is so much harder than this. So what about a language like Spanish, which I'm in New York City now, and I have here spoken all around me. I can hear people speaking, and I can hear this. I want to see if I can teach myself Spanish better, faster, than German. And I did, and I could. So I think it was a sophomore, junior in college when I first tried to teach myself a language. And from that point on, just more and more, I had some really good teachers in university, and I think I learned from them, not just language, but how to learn languages. But I think after a point, when you learn how to learn languages, you're your own best teacher. You can really control the situation a bit more, and maybe you need somebody you're the kind of learner you have to learn from interacting with somebody. You want to refer to somebody or talk to somebody. I definitely feel that when we mentioned making huge jumps forward, getting overleaps, my feeling is that the best thing to do for me, a learner like me, is to learn on my own kind of as much as I can, and then go have an intensive immersion experience. Then go work one-on-one with somebody. Ideally, I did it with a Russian family for a month. I did it with other places, other lengths of time. But I think that that's the best way. So if you can get yourself to a good level and then go work one-on-one with an experienced teacher, then you're going to go boom. As opposed to sort of going and working one-on-one with that teacher without having that background, that foundation, that'll also be good. But I just think that, in terms of use of time and resources, I like to give myself that foundation. But I'm a bookworm, when I was a kid, I was happy spending 5 hours a day reading a book. I try to incorporate, we talked about spiritual lessons, kinesthetic, we talk about athletics. I do, I run, I listen, or I used to, or I think, or I do stuff with my mind when I'm running too. So, but yeah, I think that, it's a question of learning styles and learning tastes. But I do think that sort of, for me, sort of learning on my own and then working with the tutors with how I would get somewhere fast.
I've come to that conclusion myself in the same exact way. When I was quite young, they wrote in the newspaper about me that I have only child syndrome, because I would do the same thing. I would read for a very long time. I am an only child, but I love spending time alone. I love being alone. I love reading and diving and delving into these things by myself. And it is true, you can get very far also like that. But once you've established that base, which is so important, which is the part that's missed by the people who say, I want to learn a language in 7 days. We can do quite a bit, but that's not going to cement it into your head. By getting that slow burn going, it just sets the foundation. When you do have that month with the family, that 6-week trip, or that year that year, if you've done the correct work beforehand, it's virtually in your brain forever.
Mhm.
You might dip down a little bit here and there due to your usage, but it's never going to go away again. It's pretty much cemented. And so that's what I try to stress for people that I've helped learn Slavic languages and seen people who just have, those just complete American brains, the monolingual. I am American. I cannot change any of these things. And I've helped them shift their mentality, turn off the American thing, and get them going by systematically helping them with that. And it's just fascinating to see because they truly thought that they couldn't do it. So listen, thank you so much for your time. I know we have already discussed the possibility of us coming on at another point to do a discussion in all of our languages, or let's say in all of my languages, because you definitely have gotten into well more than me.
Well, our common languages, you've got some that I don't have, so that's that.
Oh well, okay.
Out there in the world.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. It'll be tremendous. I think so. We'll definitely have to do that. And like I said, there's not a lot of videos out there with polyglots that have long form conversation in several languages. So that would be very cool, I think, for people to see, and also as a tool to learn. So once again, thank you. I think people are going to take so much from this, I know. And just as a last final thing, where should we send everybody to see more from you?
My website is alexanderarguelles.com, and I've got people are interested in biographies and information, inspiration. People find my stories inspirational, so it's written out at length there. Because I'm really interested in great books and projects. I've got lists of things to read. I'm really sadly remiss, I have to say, in answering my question and answer page, but I've got a page where I encourage people to write me, with if you have a question that's like substantial and interesting, and you think the answer might be interesting for other people too, and you let me open and answer it publicly, I'll do that. So I've got a question and answer site, but the main energy that I'm putting right now is to my academy. So I invite anybody who's interested, just go to my website, look at the academy page, see the various courses or circles that I have going, and reading and discussing literature in French, German, Spanish, Italian, conversational Latin, got Sanskrit going, Arabic. So I also have great books, reading and discussion circles, comparative history of religion circle, where we talk about things like that. So
Awesome.
Anybody interested in seeing what something is like is welcome to write to my assistant there and say, hey, could I come as a guest and see what this is like, and you can come once and see if it's for you.
Amazing. We're going to link to everything, guys. Alexander, thank you once again. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for reaching out to me.